Ohayo gozaimasu. And I am turning my attentions to a slightly longer and more in-depth video this time around to deliver on a promise I made in the video I dropped just before Christmas, talking about why the Makioka Sisters, Sasame Yuki, is for me a Christmas favourite, even though it has almost nothing, at least on the surface, to do with the festive season. I said that I was planning to look at Ichikawa Kon's film adaptation of Tanizaki Junichiro's perceived classic, one of the most celebrated Japanese novels of the 20th century. And that's just what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw on the other two key adaptations of this novel made in 1950 and in 1958 respectively, and look at how they deal with what is for Tanizaki, slightly unusual novel, slightly less sort of paradigmatic than other famous novels of his, certainly much longer. And I'm going to look at how Ichikawa deals with the complexities of the novel and the direct simplicities of the novel. I think, again, I should say ostensibly, the novel is one that is a little bit more direct, a little bit less concerned with more rarefied or complex character psychologies than are works like Quicksand or Diary of a Mad Old Man. Narrationally, it is, at least on the surface, more straightforward, a third-person narrative as opposed to the subjective first-person narratives of those novels and other Tanizaki novels. And certainly one that is a lot longer. It comes in at almost 600 pages, where many of his other works are very short novels, or perhaps more accurately can be called novellas. So let's dive into the Makioka Sisters and see what analysis we can make and what nuggets of wisdom we can bring to light. So the Makioka Sisters is, strangely enough, about four sisters of the Makioka family, a once prominent Osaka family who, following the death of the patriarch and his wife, has been in something of a long drawn-out decline. As I said, there are four sisters. From eldest to youngest, they are Tsuruko, Sachiko, Yukiko, and Taeko. The youngest, Taeko, also known as Koi-san. And they are very contrastive personalities. Tsuruko lives with her husband in a separate house. Sachiko and her husband are the ostensible heads of a different house, and with them live Yukiko and Taeko. Now, one of the preeminent themes of the novel is the place and indeed the value of tradition in the face of an ever-changing, ever-developing, increasingly modernizing Japan. The narrative is set in the latter half of the 1930s. So in the immediate run-up to and during the Sino-Pacific conflict, the war between Japan and China that preempted the Pacific conflict of World War II, and indeed it edges over into the 1940s on the very cusp of World War II. And it's a world in which there is a constant sense of fragility, of anxiousness, of change. And this is reflected in how the Makioka sisters and the spouses of Tsuruko, and in particular Sachiko, try to hang on to and implement the strictures of a patriarchal culture, a culture and a society in which the roles and responsibilities of men and women are very much set in stone. One of the recurrent scenes, if you like, throughout the narrative, and it's an entirely episodic sort of character-driven narrative. In some ways, it's an epistolary novel that unfolds through letters and other official documents. But one of the recurrent sort of scenes that we see is attempts to marry off Yukiko. From the beginning to the end of the film, we see her go through what are known in Japanese as miai, sort of preparations and meetings with an eye to an arranged marriage. And this is something that she, as a very shy, at least on the surface, very retiring character, is ambivalent about. But also key to the sort of strictures that have to be followed is that the youngest, Taiko, Koi-san, who is a far more, in some ways westernized, in some ways more outspoken, more opinionated, more individual young woman, a much more modern character. She has recurrent dalliances with men, and tradition dictates that she can't get married before her elder sister, before Yukiko. So one of the reasons why her family are keen to marry Yukiko off is so they can similarly act likewise with regard to Taiko, with regard to Koi-san, and have the key sort of facet of young Japanese womanhood that is being married sort of fulfilled and ticked off, if you like. So one of the defining facets of almost all characters, the sisters and the eldest pair's husbands in this novel, is to keep face, if you like, to behave in a way that, and a term we hear throughout the novel, is not to shed any unfavourable light or cast any unfavourable light on the family. Something that haunts the narrative, which we only are introduced to in retrospect. It's something the characters talk about. Was an incident prior to the time frame covered in the novel, in which Taiko all but eloped with her lover at the time, with a character whom she maintains a very fractious but in some ways close relationship to throughout the narrative. And this is something that the newspapers picked up on, and there was something of a minor sort of social scandal in which the name of the Makioka family was, at least as far as the elders of the family are concerned, was dragged through the mud. And this is something that they are constantly trying to make amends for, to make reparations towards, sort of overwriting or undermining this sometime sort of slight on the Makioka family name. So there is this sense in which this merchant family, which once enjoyed great wealth and privilege and status, now has to constantly fight to keep up any sort of pretense that there is some sort of continuation or furtherance even of this wealth and status and privilege. And The interplay between the respective genders is interesting from this point of view. It often falls to Tsuruko's husband, or in particular Sachiko's husband, to sort of go out into the world and to take sort of decisive action to uphold the family name, to sort out any issues that arise, to follow up on and make good on any developments regarding particularly Yukiko's proposed marriages. It often falls to the men to sort this out. It also often falls, particularly to Tsuruko's husband, to make decisions about where certain characters live, what money they can have as an allowance, what they can and can't do with their lives. Again, this typically comes down to Taeko, who, as the most free-spirited, desires things like an extended trip abroad, desires her own place, desires her own business. She's a talented doll maker, and in the novel wants to go on and become a seamstress. And this is something that is looked down upon, that is frowned upon in no uncertain terms by particularly Tsuruko and her husband, who are in some respects the most conservative voices in the film. So with Taeko as the most liberal character in many ways, and Tsuruko, the oldest, the most conservative, Sachiko and Yukiko, who typically are the at the center of the narrative. They are the two sisters whose mindset we are given most access to, whose issues and concerns are most directly and immediately dramatized. They sort of fall into this liminal space between the youngest and the oldest, between liberality and conservatism. So the way that they are pulled from one pillar to the other post suggests a lot about how this theme of tradition and modernity is explored throughout the narrative, the extended narrative. Alongside this, and in some ways complementary to it, is the notion of the transience, the inevitable, inexorable ebb and flow of time. This is something that I alluded to briefly when I spoke about the Makioka Sisters before. But there is a constant reference to time moving on, time flowing, time escaping the characters. They are, in their various ways, trying, the main characters, certainly the Makioka family as an institution, is trying to, in some ways, fight against the flow of time, to hold steady to the traditional values, the traditional ideologies, the traditional ethos that had marked them out as a major, a notable Osaka merchant family. And they are all, of course, in various ways superseded by time. They are all, I'm going to say defeated. I don't mean that in the obvious sense, but they are all subject to the whims of the constant sort of charge, the constant momentum of time. And this is something that is seen in the seasons. There is a constant reference to seasons, to the accoutrements of different seasons. So another repeated motif throughout is seeing cherry blossoms, a spring endeavour. There is constant reference to heat, to cold in summer and winter respectively, and a constant sense of the characters having to exist in a world that is forever moving forward and that is forever threatening to leave them behind. And alongside this is the theme of frailty that I talked about. The characters are sort of figuratively assailed by time, but in various ways they are very literally assailed and attacked. There are 2 or 3 key incidents in the book featuring natural disasters. One in particular is a very detailed account of a devastating flood in the region. There are also repeated moments where characters fall ill. Several of the major characters undergo quite serious illnesses at various points. So they are assailed from without by, as it were, the forces of nature of Japan and its very precarious sort of topography and geography. And also assailed from within. Their own bodies are subject at various times to repeated attacks. So the sense of frailty, of the sort of typical unpredictability of life, where no one knows what is just around the corner, means that, again, we have this tension between the past on the one hand, in which we had this mercantile family whose status was known, whose status was fixed, and we have this very uncertain future. Japan, engaged in various wars, is marching towards a very uncertain future. And again, you have the Makioka sisters and the various subsidiary characters caught in a liminal space, in a constantly fraught and fractious present tense, where the certainties of the past are being assailed and are sort of crumbling in the face of time's onslaught and the uncertain sort of imperatives of a very unknowable and unknown future. Now, this notion of known and unknown, and the tension between the two, or the slippage between the two, is something that actually characterizes the narration in this film. I said that the narration is ostensibly, at least, more straightforward, more of a sort of classical third person narration. But in fact, there are subtle little complexities to the narration. There are times when the narrator seems to know everything about which it speaks. And there are times when there appear to be gaps in the knowledge, and times when it seems to be surmising or sort of broadly relating information of which it is not entirely secure in its knowledge. To this end, the extended subjective aspects of the film, where the narration privileges certain characters and their thoughts, feelings, troubles, is given over largely to Sachiko. I think if there is a central consciousness to this film, it is Sachiko's. It is her worries about and perceptions of the different characters and the events that unfold that really defines the film. And there are some very protracted, extended moments where she is incredibly uncertain about what to do, and she's kind of weighing up the pros and cons of a particular course of action, or she's weighing up one side of events against another, and it seems like she is kind of overthinking things, if you like, to which end there is a strong sense of kind of indeterminacy, that she really is kind of lacking any firm knowledge or any secure platform or foundation from which to base the judgments that she makes or the actions that she takes. So this is, in several subtle but penetrating ways, a novel and a narrative through which run several quite deep fissures or fault lines, if you like. It's a film all about indeterminacy and tension and opposition, and about how characters try to navigate these tensions and oppositions as they face up to what these tensions and oppositions mean within a family and a society that was once known, knowable, secure, but is now riven with all kinds of uncertainties and ambiguities. And it's that I'm going to use as a point of departure in exploring in part 2 how Ishikawa Kon, in his film adaptation from the early 1980s, deals with these fissures, these deep-rooted cracks, and how, as one of, if not the sort of greatest master of adapting literature, certainly in Japanese cinema, how he realizes a film that is at once quite faithful to the novel, although questions of fidelity should never really be of primary concern when judging a film adaptation against the book that it's adapted from. And at the same time is very much its own product, its own film, and indeed can be seen as a complementary text rather than an adaptation of an original, a film that stands up in its own right as opposed to one that we have to judge alongside and somehow as part of a novel. So look out for part 2, which is going to be with you very soon. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the novel. I think this is, as I've said, unusual in some ways for Tanizaki. The novelist, actually, that it puts me in mind of more than anyone is Leo Tolstoy. There's something of the flavour of War and Peace in particular to this novel. I don't mean that there are any overt similarities in terms of style or narrative or between the authors, but just the way that Tanizaki goes about outlining how characters exist within a very, very specific milieu, how there is a kind of intimacy and insularity and an expansiveness at one and the same time. Seems quite Tolstoy-like to me. So perhaps if you've read both novels, certainly drop me a comment and let me know what you think about this comparison. Okay, follow me on X at, and catch me online at. There's new material being posted on a weekly basis. So until then, until part 2, goodbye for now.